So again, thank you for joining us this morning. So baseball season is way past done, but we have a special guest today. Ernie Found is going to join us this morning with Journey with Casey at the bat, and we're so excited to have him here. Thank you and enjoy.
Early winter morning, maybe? And it's an honor to be here for this group. It's called the name of the group is called Senior Moments. Thank you. Whoa, thank you. And I can't help but think back to my parents who were in a church group as adults when they were in their 20s and 30s, and they called it the 20-30 Club. And when they're in their 40s, it was still the 20-30 Club. And in their 50s, it was still the 20-30 Club. In their 60s, the 20-30 Club. And in their 70s and 80s, and they would go to the 20-30 Club. And my kids, one time we were with them, their grandchildren, my daughter Catherine said, "Grandpa, how come you call your older people church group the 20-30 Club? And you're all old and stuff. How come 20-30? And my dad's response was, because we still think we're in our 20s or our 30s. So, Casey at the bat. It's a little bit of a journey for me, and I hope to share it with you, some of it here today, if I press the buttons hard enough. Thank you. You know, some of us can think back to, since this is a elderly group, back to our younger days. And let's go back to the mid-70s and compare now. And back in the mid-70s, we were worried about long hair. Now we're longing for hair. This is courtesy of Casey Cook, by the way. Back in the 70s, we were concerned about 8 tracks. Now we're concerned about cataracts. We were concerned about kegs, K-E-Gs. Now we're concerned about EKGs. We were streaking, and now we're leaking. We were into acid rock, and now we're into acid reflux. We were into seeds and stems, and now we're into fiber. Well, the song Staying Alive was real popular. Now it's Staying Alive is our goal. We were hoping for a BMW, now we're just hoping for a BM. We were going to a nice new hip joint, now we're getting a new hip joint. The Rolling Stones were our fad, kidney stones are now our fad, bell-bottom pants, big bottoms now. We went to discos, and now we go to Costco's. Whatever, now we're dependent on Depends, and we used to be able to rock and roll all night. Now we're lucky if we sleep through the night. And we used to think that we knew everything, and now we think we know our name. So we've come a long ways. Baseball, I love baseball, and I know many of you do too. And it's a wonderful game. It's America's game, and but for some of you who may be a little puzzled by the game, Jerry Maynard sent this to me. He was a colleague of mine, and he was a Cubs fan, and he was struggling as to why the Cubs kept losing and losing and losing and losing and losing and losing. Anyway, he said, I figured out why the Cubs are not very good. They simply don't understand the game of baseball. So I wrote a simple explanation for them to try to help them along. And I hope this can help some of you along as well. This is a game played by 2 teams. One out, the other in. The one that's in sends players out one at a time to see if they can get in before they get out. If they get out before they get in, they come in, but it doesn't count. If they get in before they get out, it does count. When the one's out, get 3 outs from the ones in before they get in without being out. The team that's out comes in, and the team that's in goes out to get those going in out before they get in without being out. When both teams have been in and out 9 times, the game is over. The team with the most in without being out before coming in wins unless the ones in are equal, in which case the last ones go out to get the ones in before they get out without being out. The game will end when each team has the same number of ins out, but one team has more in without being out before coming in. So hopefully that will clarify the game for some of you that are mystified by the game. Like so many things in life, my journey starts with family. And this is my son and my dad and me, and we're big Cardinals fans. My dad was a big Cardinals fan. He grew up in upstate New York, and Cardinals fan right over here. There we go. I'll bet there's several here, yes. And when he was a young adult in the 40s, the Rochester Red Wings were the minor league farm team for the Cardinals. And the Cardinals had a farm system where many of the players would play and ascend through the farm system. So many eventual St. Louis Cardinals played in Rochester as the Rochester Red Wings, and he saw many of them play, including Stan Musial, who played in Rochester for about 2 days before they moved him up. So I didn't have any choice but to be a Cardinals fan living in upstate New York State, Buffalo, Rochester area. And when I was a kid in the 40s, as you all well know, the Cardinals were world champs in '64 and '67 and in the World Series in '68. So being a Cardinals fan was the best, you know, particularly when they beat the frickin' New York Yankees in 1964. So anyway, Casey at the bat entered my life then. And here's just a little depiction of what it's like to be a Cardinals fan. These are the 11 championship rings of the St. Louis Cardinals. 1926, 1931, 1934, 1942, 1944, 1946, 1964, 1967, 1982, 2006, and 2011. 11. Here are the Chicago Cubs championship rings. And if you look very closely, there's a Cubs fan right there. If you look very closely, kind of hard to see, but in the lower left, the date on that ring is 1908. God, I think that's over a century ago. The other one is 1907. They had a little streak going. And then, like in all things, a fluky year comes along in 2016, and they happen to pull one out. So my dad was getting ready to celebrate his 85th birthday, and I was trying to think what we could do. And this is a CD called Play Ball, which has the Cincinnati Pops Orchestra playing many of the popular movie themes about baseball. The Natural, Angels in the Outfield, Field of Dreams, and on and on and on. And it has Sounds of the Ballpark on it. It has Abbott and Costello doing Who's on First, What's on Second. And it also has James Earl Jones reciting Casey at the bat with the Cincinnati Orchestra playing the music in the background. Well, I was quite taken by that, and I thought, wouldn't it be neat if I could somehow do that for my dad for his 85th birthday? So I commissioned Dan Knight, the piano player Dan, and Dan took the orchestral music and put it in a piano piece for me to play. And so I worked and worked, and I got the piano piece down, and I had the poem down pretty well. And about 2 weeks before the performance, man, it was just darn hard to play and talk at the same time. And I was struggling, and I said, I'm not going to be able to pull this off. But anyway, my son Greg came to my rescue. He recited the poem. I played the piano, and we had a wonderful 85th birthday. So that's what kind of got me going with Casey at the bat. Several years passed along, and then a guy by the name of Frank Deford entered into my life. Frank Deford, and you recognize his name a little bit? Frank Deford was a sports writer, and he was the chief editor for Sports Illustrated for, 25 years ago, or 25 years. And actually, Frank wrote more chief articles relative to what the picture was on the front cover of Sports Illustrated than anybody. And I used to love to read Frank Deford's articles. I would read the Sports Illustrated, that would come. I mean, that was the Bible, and then as well as newspapers. And this is pre-internet or anything. The Sports Illustrated would come in the mail on Friday afternoons, and it was my afternoon entertainment. And I would always read the Sports Illustrated magazine the same way. I would go to the back page, and Rick Riley would have a little back page article called The Life of Riley, which was some little humorous or humanistic little article. And then I would go to the front and see if Frank Deford wrote an article. And no matter what he wrote about, I would read it. I remember one time he wrote an article about Indiana women's synchronized swimming. And he has just such a marvelous way with words, and I would circle some of the words and I would look them up because I wanted to be able to use them just like Frank did. And he was my sports writing idol. Well, he showed up in Iowa City, and he was sent along by HBO. And Frank, some of you remember, he was on NPR in the morning, Wednesday mornings. He would do a little 5-minute sports thing, and he pulled out all the punches. I remember he would talk about when steroids were a problem in baseball, and he would just muster the players that were using him and things like that. But Frank came to Iowa City as part of Brian Gumbel, Real Sports with Brian Gumbel, and regarding the West High volleyball team. And Coach Bresnahead had written Frank Deford. Frank Deford was working for Real Sports with Brian Gumbel on HBO as a side thing. And Coach Bresnahan sent him a little article, a little letter about the West High volleyball team and what had transpired. And Frank must have taken it to heart because he said, I want to do this. Yeah, so he came out to Iowa City. I think it probably caught Frank's heart a little bit. His daughter, as an 8-year-old, died of cystic fibrosis, which back then was an incurable disease. It still is, but it can be managed much better now. And so I think that kind of caught his heart a little bit. So Frank came out, and golly, I spent lots of time with Frank. And I was so worried he was going to come out, and he had his camera people and this and that, and it was going to be, all right, isn't it time to go in and get one of those pork sandwiches here in Iowa and things. He couldn't have been further than interesting and wanted to listen, and he met all the players and spent time. He was an absolute joy to be with, and I spent a lot of private time with him, and we talked about losing a child, and he was a remarkable, remarkable man. And so he's the one that put together the HBO thing about the West High volleyball team. And he did a marvelous job with it. In fact, he did too good of a job with it, because then the big-time movie people came out and blah, 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 and all that stuff. That's a whole other story. But as I was driving Frank around we would listen to the tape play ball. He was a big baseball fan too. And so the very last night, had a little dinner for him, a little barbecue, and we were just sitting in the kitchen waiting for people to come over. And we were playing that tape play ball. And sure enough, up comes James Earl Jones doing Casey at the bat. And so I turned to Frank and I said, you know, the outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville Nine that day. And Frank said, and the score stood 4-2 with but 1 inning left to play. And I said, when Barrows died at first and Clooney did the same, he said, a sickly silence fell upon the patrons of the game. So I said, Frank, you're familiar with that poem? He said, yeah. Yeah, I'm familiar with that poem. That's all he said. I blew it. I've got dark up here on my screen somehow. Thank you. So we bid our farewells. He actually came back a month later on his own just to spend time in Iowa City, in the community, and be with the players a little bit and to spend some additional time. Then about a week later, I received a package in the mail, and I opened it up, and there was a 3-page handwritten letter from Frank, kind of reminiscing about some of the things we had talked about. And also in the package was a book, and this is the book, Casey on the Loose, What Really Might Have Happened by Frank Deford. So Frank had written a book giving Casey real life, a novel made up, and what it was like in the baseball in the 1880s, and he gave Casey an agent, and he gave Casey a girlfriend, and he gave Casey a favorite bar that he went to, and the bartender and things like that. But that just kind of depicts what Frank Deford was all about. I said, Frank, are you familiar with the poem? All he said was, yeah, I'm familiar with that poem. Son of a gun, he'd written a frickin' book about the whole thing. But that was Frank. So time goes on, and I heard about a symposium going on in Cooperstown called the Cooperstown Symposium on Baseball and American Culture. This is 2019, I think. And so I decided to go. What the heck? I don't know who's going to be there, but I love Cooperstown, and many have been to Cooperstown. It is just a delightful, delightful little town, and a joy to be there. There's the Farmers Museum, there's the Glimmer Glass. It's just a wonderful, James Fenimore Cooper Museum and so forth, a wonderful town. Anyway, there for the symposium, and topics at the symposium would range from, these are all baseball gurus, baseball writers, baseball researchers, baseball book people, and then there were some of us sitting in the back row, just kind of baseball groupie wannabes, let's listen to this kind of thing. But topics would range from, I don't know, why does a curveball curve, all the way up to women's professional baseball in Japan in the 1940s, and you know, everything in between. So it was a real joy to be there. And the last evening, we would go right next door to the museum in the Hall of Fame, where there's a little park, and we would play the game of stickball. And stickball is the original baseball. Many people think baseball came from the British game of cricket, but it didn't. It's from this game called stickball, where you have 4 sticks in the ground and use a ball and a stick to hit it, and you run and you throw the ball at the runners and things like that. It eventually evolved into baseball. And at the end of the game, over walks this guy dressed up as Casey. And he seemed to know most everybody. Hi, Bill. Hi, Fred. Hugs and things back and forth. And so we finish up the game, and then the group walks from the park over into the Hall of Fame to have dinner in the hall of the Hall of Fame. So as the group is walking on over, I see Casey just kind of walking by himself. And I pulled one of my mother's moves, and I went up and I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, you know, the outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville Nine that day. And he said, and the score stood 4-2 with but one inning left to play. And I said, and when Barrows died at first and Clooney did the same, he said a sickly silence fell upon the patrons of the game. So the two of us went back and forth reciting the poem as we're walking into the Hall of Fame for the dinner. And we got to the door just as we were finishing, and he said, hi, my name is Tim Wiles. And hi, my name's Ernie Found. Where are you from? Blah, blah, blah. And Tim said, well, listen, I've got to be the program here tonight. I used to be the head librarian and head researcher here at the Hall of Fame. And while I was here, I depicted Casey. And I probably did it over 2,000 times. But 3 years ago, I moved to Albany State. I'm the librarian there. But they invited me to come back tonight and recite Casey at the bat. I haven't done it in a long time. I think I can do it okay, but you clearly know it. Why don't you come up with me and sit right in front of me, and in case I stumble a little bit, you can help me out. So I said, sure, that sounds like a pretty good deal. I don't know where else I was going to sit. So I go up to the tables, and there are these circular tables, and we sit down up close to the front, and chatting with Tim Wiles a little bit, and I look across the table, and here's this very elderly African-American gentleman in his high 90s. It was James Jackson, who was Jackie Robinson's roommate when Jackie Robinson played for the Kansas City Monarchs. And then a couple people over is Ty Cobb's granddaughter and stuff. So anyway, chatting away and getting to know Tim a little bit. And it comes time for Tim to run his program. And the first thing he does is, well, do I have another slide or something? Yeah. That's Tim, by the way. Tim wrote a book, or part of it was a responsible helper of the book, called The Story of Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Tim Wiles was actually the lead writer on the article, so in the book. So he starts out his program, and he has everybody sing, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." So are we game? Now, when it comes to the part, root for the home team, you can say Cardinals, you can say Cubs. If you say Cardinals, you get an extra sandwich at lunchtime. If you say Cubs, your sandwich only gets one slice of meat. Let's see. Are you ready? Take out to the ball game. Take. All right, so Tim finishes that up, and then he breaks into his oh, I guess we got all that, didn't we? The words and stuff, sorry. So then he gets into his recitation of Casey at the bat, and he does just splendidly. He doesn't need my help at all. And so he sits down, And he gave a nice little history about how the story of Take Me Out to the Ball Game came to be, which is a great story. But anyway, he sits down, and I said, Tim, nice job, way to go. You got through that just fine. I said, but Tim, I notice you're left-handed. And he said, well, yeah, I am, as a matter of fact. How did you know? I said, well, I'm left-handed too, so maybe I was a little sensitive to it all, but every time you depicted Casey batting, you were swinging from the left side. I said, I'm not quite sure Casey was left-handed. There's nothing in the poem to say one way or the other. Well, that got the discussion going at the table with all these baseball gurus about left-handedness. And what's the percentage of lefties in the general population? 9.5%, 10%, something like that. What's the percentage of lefties in Major League Baseball? About 20%. What's the percentage of left-handed pitchers in Major League Baseball? About 24, 25%. So that got into discussion. How come, and do lefties have an advantage, and so on and so forth, which is kind of fun. Anyway, the evening ended. The next day, I was walking around the museum at the Hall of Fame, and son of a gun, there were 5 portraits depicting Casey at the bat. And son of a gun, one of them had Casey batting left-handed. So, of course, I had to take a picture of that, send a note to Tim. Tim, you know, maybe it's okay, and back and forth and back and forth. So that's how I kind of developed my relationship with Tim Wiles. The next year, the meeting was, they didn't have it because of COVID. The next year, they tried to have it via Zoom, which was a disaster. So then I went the next year and got a hold of Tim. We went out and had lunch, and we were talking about Casey at the bat a little bit. And I said, Tim, by the way, where did you get your outfit? And he said, well, you know, I've got 5 of them. I probably could get by with 4. So about a month later, he sent me one of his outfits in the mail. Problem was it didn't quite fit, but that's okay. It's a thought that counts. But I got, you know, where to get it and stuff like that. So that then gets us up to this year for the symposium. And about 3 days from before the symposium, Tim Wiles sends me a message, and he said, Ernie, are you coming to the symposium? Yeah. Great. Listen, could you do Casey at the bat for me at the program? And I said, well, Tim, yeah, I guess so. I'll have to work on it a little bit. No, you've got it down. Go ahead, go ahead. And so I got to thinking, sure, I'll do it. And so I got to, how come he doesn't want to do it? So I called him back the next day. I said, Tim, you know, what's up? Well, you know, and you've done it for 25 years. Why don't you do it one last time, make that your grand finale, and go out with a big bang? And he said, well, I would like to, but I've actually developed an essential tremor, and I've got early Parkinson's, and I'm having trouble remembering things, and I could probably get through it, but boy, it would take a load off my mind if you would do it. So I said, Tim, absolutely, no problem. So that's what got me to do Take Me Out the Ball Game in the hall of the Hall of Fame, which was quite an honor, to say the least. And if we focus in real closely on that lower left plaque, this is the plaque. So I was literally, I don't know, 15 feet from from Babe Ruth's plaque in the Hall of Fame. So with that as an introduction as to the journey, we might as well get right into Casey. Jeff Sherris, by the way, on the piano. Casey at the bat, Ernest Lawrence Thayer, 1888, San Francisco Examiner. Ernest Lawrence Thayer went to Harvard, and he was one of the writers for their Harvard Lampoon. He met a classmate by the name of William Randolph Hearst, who owned the San Francisco Examiner. That's what got him back to San Francisco. The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville Nine that day. The score stood 4-2 with but one inning left to play. And when Barrows died at first and Clooney did the same, a sickly silence fell upon the patrons of the game. A straggling few got up to leave in deep despair. The rest clung to that hope which springs eternal within the human breast. If only Casey could get a whack at that, we'd put up even money now with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, as did Jimmy Blake. And the former was a Lulu, and the latter was a cake. So upon that stricken multitude, grim melancholy said, for there appeared but little hope of Casey getting to the bat. But Flynn let out a single to the wonderment of all, and Blake, the much despised, tore the cover off the ball. And when the dust had settled and men saw what had occurred, there was Jimmy safe at second and Flynn a hugging third. From 10,000 throats or more there rose a lusty yell. It rumbled through the valley, it rattled in the dell, and knocked upon the mountain and recoiled upon the flat. For Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place. There was pride in Casey's bearing and a smile on Casey's face. And when responding to the crowd, he lightly doffed his hat. No stranger in the crowd could doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded as he wiped them on his shirt. Then when the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance gleamed in Casey's eye. A sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather-covered sphere came hurtling through the air, and Casey stood a-watching it in haughty grandeur there. Close by the sturdy batsman, the ball unheeded sped. That ain't my style, said Casey. Strike one, the umpire said. From the benches black with people, there went up a muffled roar, like the beating in the storm waves on the stern and distant shore. Kill him! Kill the umpire! Shouted someone in the stand. And it likely they'd have done so had not Casey raised his hand. With a smile of Christian charity, great Casey's visage shone. He stilled the rising tumult. He bade the game go on. And bade the game go on. And then what happened? He was baiting. He signaled to the pitcher, and once more the spheroid flew. But Casey still ignored it. And the umpire said, strike two. Fraud, cried the maddened thousands, and the echo answered fraud. But one scornful look from Casey, and the audience was awed. They saw his face grow stern and cold. They saw his muscles strain. And they kept straining. And they were really straining. They all knew that Casey would not let that ball go by again. And now the sneer is gone from Casey's lip. His teeth are clenched in hate. He pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate. And now the pitcher holds the ball, and now he lets it go, and now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in this promised land, the sun is shining bright. The band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light. And somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out. A little senior moment there, but that's only appropriate. Now, Jeff, don't go too far. Where did Jeff go? Do you go outside? Oh, okay. Anyway, I always felt a little, I always felt a little sad for Casey, you know? I mean, heck, he struck out, and that's no way to, that's no way to finish things up. And you know, yeah, in baseball, you know, you bat 300, you're doing real well. But, you know, he struck out, poor guy. And, well, I guess there are several other people that kind of felt the same way. Because here is a book called The Annotated Casey at the Bat. This has about 40 follow-up poems about Casey. Titles such as Why Casey Whiffed, Casey's Sister at the Bat, Casey's Daughter at the Bat. Mad Magazine did a thing called Cool Casey at the Bat. Casey 20 years later, and one Casey 40 years later. In fact, Ray Bradbury actually wrote a follow-up about Casey at the Bat. But the one I enjoy the most is called Casey's Revenge. Jeff, you up for doing Casey's Revenge? What the heck? All right. Casey's Revenge. Got it. There were saddened hearts in Mudville for a week or maybe more. There were uttered oaths and curses. Every fan was sore. Just think, said one, how soft it looked with Casey at the bat, and then to think he'd go and spring some Bush League trick like that. All his past fame was forgotten. He was now a hopeless shine. For they called him Strikeout Casey from the mayor on down the line. And as he came to bat each day, his bosom heaved a sigh, while a look of hopeless fury shone in mighty Casey's eye. He pondered in the days gone by how he had been their king. When he strolled up to the plate, they made the welkin ring. But now his nerve had vanished, for when he heard them hoot, he fanned or popped out daily like some minor league recruit. I love that line. He soon began to sulk and loaf. His batting eye went lame. No home runs in the scorecard now were chalked against his name. The fans, without exception, gave the manager no peace, for one and all kept clamoring for Casey's quick release. The Mudville squad began to slump. The team was in the air. Their playing went from bad to worse. No one seemed to care. Back to the woods with Casey was the cry from Hooters Row. Get someone who can hit that ball and let that big duff go. The lane is long, someone has said, that never turns again. And fate, though fickle, often gives a second chance to men. And Casey smiled. His rugged face no longer wore a frown, for the pitcher who had started all the trouble just arrived in town. All Mudville had assembled. 10,000 fans had come to see the twirler who had put Big Casey on the bum. And when he stepped onto the mound, the multitude went wild. He doffed his cap in proud disdain, but Casey only smiled. Play ball, the umpire's voice rang out, and then the game began. But in that throng of thousands, there wasn't a single fan who thought that Mudville stood a chance. Then with the setting sun, their hopes sank low, for the rival team was leading 4-1. The last half of the ninth came round with no change in the score. But when the first man up hit safe, the crowd began to roar. The din increased. The echo of 10,000 fans was heard when the pitcher hit the second and gave 4 balls to the third. 3 men on base, nobody out, 3 runs to tie the game. A triple meant the highest snitch in the Mudville Hall of Fame. But here the rally ended. And the gloom was deep as night when the 4th fouled to catcher and the 5th flew out to right. A dismal groan in chorus came. I love that line. A dismal groan in chorus came. A scowl was on each face when Casey walked up, bat in hand, slowly took his place. His bloodshot eyes in fury gleamed. His teeth were clenched in hate. He gave his cap a vicious hook and pounded on the plate. But fame is fleeting as the wind, and glory fades away. There were no wild and woolly cheers, no glad acclaim this day. They hissed and moaned and gloated, "Strike him out!" But Casey gave no outward sign that he had even heard this shout. The pitcher smiled, cut one loose. Across the plate it sped. Another hiss, another groan. "Strike one," the umpire said. Zip like a shot. A second curve broke just below the knee. Broke just below the knee. And then what happened? "Strike two," the umpire roared aloud. But Casey made no plea. No roasting of the umpire now, for his was an easy lot. But here, the pitcher whirled again. Was that a rifle shot? A whack, a crack, and out through the space, the leather pellet flew. a blot against the distant sky, a speck against the blue. Above the fence in center field in rapid whirling flight, the sphere sailed on. The blot grew dim and then was lost to sight. 10,000 hats were thrown in air, 10,000 threw a fit, but no one ever found the ball the mighty Casey hit. Oh, somewhere in this favored land, dark clouds may hide the sun, and somewhere bands no longer play, and children have no fun, and somewhere over blighted lives there hangs a heavy ball. But Mudville hearts are happy now. Mighty Casey hit the ball. Give it up for Jeff. Anyway, there we have it. Casey.
I have a question for you.
Figured Casey would be the first one to ask a question, wouldn't you? Casey at the right? Yes, sir.
So, you asked a question of the general crowd. You asked a question of the general crowd, contrasting yourself with Tim, and named a person that had something to do with Babe Ruth. Could you, do you remember what I'm talking about? You asked the assembled masses.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so that night when I did Casey at the Bat in the Hall of Fame, Tim gave a wonderful, wonderful talk about his experiences of being Casey at the Bat for some 25 years or so. And he did it not only there in Cooperstown at the Hall of Fame, but he went various places. And actually he tells a great story about he was doing it to Bush, George W. Bush, who was part owner, I think, of the Texas Rangers, or maybe was at the time. And they were in a group setting, maybe 10 or 12 people, and Tim was doing Casey at the Bat, and he had the bat, and there came a point where he pounds with true violence his bat upon the plate. Well, the Secret Service came over and grabbed him both by their shoulders and grabbed him back and exited him out, so he never even got to finish his poem with George W. Bush. But anyway, I was a little worried about how we're going to make the transition from here's, somebody who had done Casey at the Bat, forever. And here's some little, hi, my name's Ernie Found, and I'm here from Iowa City, and I'm going to do Casey at the Bat. How are we going to make that a little transition? And so I kind of, got him back up, said, that was wonderful. I can't imagine the number of faces smiles you put on people's faces and pictures. And what do you think? I think Tim should be here in the Hall of Fame. What do you think? And everybody, yeah. And I turned over to the big head honcho baseball gurus and said, listen, you're only inducting 2 people into the Hall of Fame this year, and it's 6 weeks away. I mean, we still got time to get things moving here for Tim. So that was kind of my little transition. And then, so then I asked the question, who replaced Babe Ruth? And I can't remember the name right now, Casey, which is terrible, but does anybody remember the name? No, the guy who replaced Babe Ruth. Sure enough, somebody in the back row stands up and says, I can't remember, it was George Smith. It wasn't George Smith, but, and wow, so anybody remember what his nickname was? Somebody over here, yeah, his nickname was Twinkle Toes. And so that just kind of shows the, what people are like here at this at the convention. So it's a great meeting. Is David Jepson here? No, he was maybe going to come. David, I don't know if you know David. David is a big baseball fan, and he actually gave a talk here a couple years ago there on baseball nicknames, which is pretty cool. And he really organized it real well and stuff like that. But that's the best I can remember, that little Babe Ruth story. And I can't remember, I should remember his name, but I am having a senior moment with that name, yeah. George Selker, you got it exactly right. Who went on to have an illustrious career for the Yankees. They won the World Series, I think, 3 years in a row while he played. Yeah, George Selker. Thank you. Thank you. Well done. Yeah.
When the Cardinals beat the Yankees, Jackie Robinson scored on a steal of home. And Yogi Berra claimed that he was out. And it was the first time he really argued with an umpire out of that. Until the day he died, Jackie Robinson was out. How important was that out for the outcome of the game?
Critical. The Cardinals won that game. So that was 1946, as you remember. Yeah. Which gets us to 1964. Should we tell a little story about 1964? We got a little time? There's a book, David Hammerstram, who's quite a writer, he writes a lot of history things, wrote a book entitled October 1964. And the premise of the book is the World Series in 1964 had a huge impact on American history. And so you're wondering, how did baseball, the World Series, have an impact? Well, let's go back to 1964. The World Series was the St. Louis Cardinals versus the New York Yankees. Yankees had won, I don't know what, 11 out of the previous 13 World Championships, something like that. Cardinals had not won it since 1946. But more than that, New York Yankees, of course, are this big, powerful northern team. The St. Louis Cardinals in 1964 were the furthest team in the South. There was no teams in Atlanta, no teams in Texas, no teams in Florida, and so forth. So the St. Louis Cardinals were the team of the South. And the radio station for St. Louis, KMOX, had the second largest network outside of WGN in Chicago. So all of the South listened to the St. Louis Cardinals. So they were the team of the South. Clearly the New York Yankees were the team of the North. I was 11 years old. To me, it was my Cardinals versus the doggone New York Yankees. More than that, it was black versus white. Let's go through the St. Louis Cardinals starting lineup in 1964 very quickly. Starting pitcher, best pitcher, Bob Gibson, black. Catcher, Tim McCarver, white. First baseman, Bill White, who was black. Second baseman, Julian Avier. He was Latino, but that equaled black back then. Shortstop, Del Maxwell. Third base, Ken Boyer. Left field, Lou Brock, black. Center field, Kurt Flood, black. Right field, Mike Shannon. So over, what's that, 5, maybe 6 of the St. Louis Cardinals starting lineup were black. Let's go through the New York Yankees starting lineup in 1964. Their starting pitcher and best pitcher was Whitey Ford. I wonder what color he was. Catcher, Yogi Berra. First base, Joe Pepitone. Second base, Bobby Richardson. Shortstop, Phil Rizzuto maybe? What's that? Gil McDougal? Shortstop? Anyway, white. Third base, Clete Boyer, who was the brother of Ken Boyer, who played for the Cardinals, white. Left field, Tom Tresh. Center field, Mickey Mantle. Right field, Roger Maris. So, all the way. So this, for most of America, was black versus white, North versus South. I mean, again, I didn't know that. I was a baseball fan, and my Cardinals were kind of loud. And the Cardinals won the World Series that year in 7 games. And the premise of David Hammerstram's book is that just opened up the floodgates for African Americans to come into Major League sports. I mean, how many professional basketball players in 1964 were African American? How many football players? And there were actually 2 big leagues then and stuff, hardly any. So this opened up Major League sports to African Americans for all the sports. And you know, his premise again is that had such a huge influence on American history, even something equal to what Martin Luther King's speech was all about, and so forth. So anyway, that's 1964, Cardinals versus Yankees. So good to see the Yankees lose that year. Golly. Yeah.
Number 9.
For?
Number 9.
Yes. Well, for 2 reasons. The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville 9 that day. And 9 was the number of my daughter Caroline and Catherine. So, but mainly the Mudville 9. So good. Let's go out and have some lunch. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Well done. Thank you very much.
I got halfway through the first one and realized I brought the one without the cords. That's why I ran and got the second.
Oh, is it okay? Okay, I thought you.